voy a presentar al moderador del próximo panel, que se titula Un ecosistema de medios sostenibles y diversos, proyectos de ley. ¿Cuánto deberían pagar las empresas tecnológicas por los contenidos que distribuyen? Carlos Jornet, presidente de la Comisión de Libertad de Prensa e Información de la CIP, es quien moderará el panel. Carlos es director periodístico de uno de los diarios líderes de la Argentina, La Voz del Interior de Córdoba. Fue presidente de la Asociación de Entidades Periodísticas Argentinas, de ADEPA. Es abogado, licenciado en Ciencias de la Información y magíster en Dirección de Empresas, autor del libro de texto Gestión Periodística. Un gusto, Carlos, gracias y adelante. Carlos Jornet.
Thank you. Hi, Danielle. Hi, Haaris. I'm sorry, but I is going to speak in Spanish. You can use the translation. Okay. Danielle Coffey es presidenta, consejera delegada de News Media Alliance. Yes. Sorry, please.
The interpretation is going over your words, but I
Yes,
think
yes.
you're asking me to begin, which I'm happy to.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Carlos, and also Carlos Loria. It's very nice of you to have me. We've had initial conversations about continuing our work together. I've always really enjoyed the relationship with IAPA and everything that the organization has done. And as always, appreciate being included in this important conversation around the future of quality journalism that is a global issue. And I do believe that working together and working as a united global front, as I have also with Ryan and Paul, as well as our Australian partners, I was very impressed by the coordination that I saw globally as the Canadians undertook their effort. And I just look forward to that continuing, because I do believe that we are stronger together. The News Media Alliance has been working hard on advocating for the business aspects of our news magazine to keep newsrooms open and to keep journalists employed. What we produce is, as an industry, is incredibly valuable to communities, to society, to democracy, and it's worth every ounce of effort. I do believe that we should adhere to our principles and our mission, and that if we can monetize our content, we can control our own fate, regardless of platform, distributor, medium, or whatever new technology comes our way. But to do that, we first have to change the trajectory and focus on the compensation legislation from big tech, similar to what you just discussed, the Online News Act. Here in the US, it's known as the JCPA in our federal Congress, in the US Congress, that's led by Senators Klobuchar and Kennedy. But there are also, as you heard, bills pending in California, Illinois, New York, and many other states are exploring launching legislation as well. In California, that will be the most imminent development, because Assembly Member Buffy Wicks is leading legislation that would require compensation from big tech to news publishers. As Paul said, it does look a lot, and even more so every day, like the Online News Act. But what happened was, because it's so promising, it had a near unanimous, only a few members that get voted against in the Assembly, the first chamber that the bill goes through. In the Senate, it's pending, and they have the votes to pass it, and therefore the big tech platforms are frightened, understandably. And in typical form, like they've done in other countries, Google decided to announce that they were withholding access to news in California. as a response to the legislation. And they were very open about why. They were doing it as a business decision. It was a negotiation tactic that we've seen, and it backfired again. The Senate president in particular is outraged, and will be pulling Google before the California state legislature to explore withholding critical information from California citizens because of a business dispute. This has never happened in the United States. And so there's current pending litigation from the Department of Justice, the FTC, as well as the California State AG on the monopoly practices of Google. So this was an interesting strategic decision on their part. We've alerted the DOJ, California AG, and the FTC to these actions so that they can investigate and incorporate these activities into their current lawsuit, which the remedy is to break up this company, which is closing out in May. So the timing of this tactic was very interesting. I would venture to say ill-advised. Assemblymember Buffy Wicks continues to forge ahead with her legislation, which is on track to move forward in June, and now may be accelerated because of what Google has done here. The legislation has been amended to pay out per journalist, like Canada. So we're borrowing from our brethren, and when we see things go well. And so it has been changed to pay out equally per journalist. It will also steer the funds towards small publications in a similar but different way than Canada did. And it will limit the benefit to California. Negotiations, like I said, are underway, and we hope to achieve even more to heighten the precedent and the amazing job that Canada's already done of $21,000 per journalist that they should be receiving. I was very impressed with their fight, and we hope to set the bar even higher. This payment will be annual and in perpetuity. We must be paid the fair market value of our content. That's a must. Big tech will continue to fight vehemently. They will try to get their payment as low as possible. We know this. Facebook may very well want to get out of the news business entirely. They have never much enjoyed the label of being an accurate source of news and information. It's something that they see as a burden. On the other hand, Google still purports to provide open access. I'm putting it in quotes because it's on their website. Open access to the world's information. Now they'll have to add a note that says, unless it's information about the world that we've stolen and that we don't want to pay for. It's the ultimate taking your toys out of the sandbox and going home. Next, what we'll see is they'll mobilize their small funded local publications that Google funds to claim catastrophe and that the sky is falling and that the legislation is harming the very people intended to benefit. Same playbook. We've seen it before. We'll continue to fight. While I'm with you, I would mention another priority effort we've undertaken related to artificial intelligence, or GAI. We see this as an existential threat to our industry. It's an exacerbation. It builds upon the existing problem of news publishers not receiving the fair market value for our content. In this case, it's copyright protected content. AI developers are vacuuming our content up to train their models and produce outputs, which also competes with our product, and it quite literally could eviscerate our industry. We've written a white paper on this topic and the unlawful and uncompensated use of our content. And I would also say that in this case, local news is particularly valuable because it has, we have companies with rich archives over hundreds of years that cover our nation's history that no one else has access to. There's a market there. We sell it. We license it today. So another party taking it for free is particularly egregious. The most concerning activity, however, is something called RAG. It's retrieval augmented generation. It's also called grounding sometimes. And all it is those are fancy words, meaning the LLMs, these AI developers, are now taking our real-time content from search. So they're reporting on today's stories, which is directly competitive with what we do. It is actually exactly what we do. There's no business model for us in that structure. Users will not click through, and we will not monetize our content. We are exploring litigation. We've created a collective voluntary licensing framework, like music, for all to participate. We're crafting legislation that would address this unjust misappropriation of our content and give our publishers tools to fight back. And other issues that we're covering include the Press Act that would protect journalists. That was just unanimously passed by the House, now pending in the Senate. A comprehensive privacy legislation was just introduced, among other issues, and also in the states across the country to make sure that all of our members are protected in all of the states, so that we can ensure that that laws don't impact their bottom lines, so that they can keep newsrooms open. I've enjoyed our relationship with IAPA because we're stronger together. We can only achieve great results when we're aligned. Divide and conquer is not a strategy. Our adversaries know that that's what makes us weaker. I do value what we provide as a country, to the country and to society, and I look forward to continuing our good work together. Thank you very much.
Gracias Daniel. Ya vamos a pasar con Haaris para hablar justamente sobre cuánto deberían pagar las plataformas a los editores estadounidenses. Ya está con nosotros Martín Etchevers, que es el moderador titular de esta conferencia. Pero antes te quería consultar, Daniel, porque mencionaste a los medios más pequeños de California, y te quería consultar porque hay otras asociaciones de editores como Lion que han salido a respaldar la posición de Google, mencionando aportes crecientes a través de programas de capacitación, de mentoreo, que representaron para cada medio asociado un promedio, dicen, de unos $130.000 en 2023, y que hay otros programas para editores de medios más pequeños. ¿Qué conoces de eso? ¿Cuál es tu posición al respecto? Porque es una de las disputas que hay en California en estos momentos.
Thank you for that question. When I referred to the small outlets that are funded by Google, it's predominantly Lion that I was referring to, and they disclose that they receive Google funding. So so what we've seen in the past is that when legislation that would benefit publishers, news publishers, and in a way that it doesn't today, particularly small news publications. My larger publications have enough leverage in some cases not to get paid the fair market value, because with a monopoly, that's just not possible. But they'll be paid something. But the small publications are really those who are left behind. That's really the intended beneficiary of the legislation. Those who aren't paid today should get their fair market value. Everyone should. And so I understand how it's confusing that small publications would say that funds would hurt them. But if you look at their funding sources, which they disclose freely, it helps to explain that anomaly. It helps to explain that confusion. And I will commend Lion for Chris Newsom is their president, and he has directed his or recommended to his membership to identify themselves as a Lion member when they oppose the legislation, so that legislators are aware that this is a Google-funded operation. And so I will give him credit for that disclosure.
Gracias, Daniel. Bueno, para dejarle armado el panel a Martín, voy a presentar a Haaris Mateen, que es profesor adjunto de finanzas en el City Bauer College of Business de la Universidad de Houston, en Texas, y que lo más importante para esta charla es que junto a Anya Schifrin de la Universidad de Columbia, a Haaris Tabakovic y Patrick Holder, ambos del Bartle Group, es coautor de un ensayo en el que estimaron cuánto deberían pagar Google y Meta a los medios estadounidenses por el uso comercial de los contenidos que estos generan. Para nosotros, desde la CIP, intentar precisar el valor que aportamos los medios de comunicación al entorno digital y en especial al negocio de las plataformas globales, no implica confrontar, sino buscar bases bien fundadas de argumentos sólidos para una negociación razonable entre ambas partes, ¿no? Nuestra declaración de Salta sobre libertad de expresión en el mundo digital justamente dice que los actores del ecosistema digital deben lograr un balance adecuado entre libertad de expresión, los derechos de autor y la propiedad intelectual. Y para hacerlo, la mejor vía es el diálogo, la cooperación y el equilibrio, si se da en buena hora, si no, bueno, habrá que buscar otras alternativas. Pero para eso te pregunto, Haaris, ¿cuál es la metodología que han utilizado ustedes para poder llegar a esta conclusión de que los medios estadounidenses deberían estar recibiendo unos 14.000 millones de dólares por año en función de los contenidos que generan y que las plataformas utilizan?
Thank you so much for the opportunity. In fact, what I did was that because I'm an economist, I decided to make some slides. So I'll share some slides while I talk about the exact question that you've posed to me. So can you see my slides?
Perfect.
Yeah, perfect. Okay. So the whole idea behind what should be the value of news to publishers, to platforms, proceeds through what I like to call sound economic logic. I'm an economist, and the way I'll go about is we've already discussed bargaining codes. I think we've already had good discussions on the Australian example. Canada, we just heard from Paul. Indonesia, interestingly, has passed a regulation, a presidential decree recently, and Danielle is the expert on what's happening in the US. We've also been part of the South African hearings. So let me jump to the question that you've asked me, which is how to value news, right? And I want to start that by saying that you could use the same methodology that we used in our paper that was focused on the US. The same methodology, and you could apply that to countries in Latin America. And this is just using the same set of assumptions, same set of parameters. And you can see the calculations were very kindly done by Professor Jean-Hugues Roy. So it's in the European style. So the commas mean decimals, as we like to say it. So what it says is that what Google owes Latin America and the Caribbean countries is $1.4 trillion, right? And you can see that depending on the size of the economy, depending on the size of different countries, the respective amounts that are owed to different countries. So how did we come to this? Why does whenever we come to such numbers, in fact, when we came to $14 billion, us as authors, us as economists, we got scared by the numbers initially, because anything and everything that we know about current negotiations suggests that what Google and Facebook and Meta are paying is well below this number, right? So what's the big idea, right? There are two big principles behind valuing news on platforms. And it's the first one is what we economists like to call surplus value, which basically means that if two parties come together in a transaction, they produce value that is more than what they would produce in isolation, right? So Google and Meta are fond, and Google especially are fond of telling news publishers how platforms provide, this wonderful channel where they can post their links, and these links then get click-throughs, and it's one form of distributing news content. And the argument then is that you should be grateful because we're giving you another channel for distribution. But what this often misses, and that's what we tried to bring out in the paper as clearly as possible, was that for platforms, news media is extremely critical, especially for something like Google search. Can you imagine a lot of your Google search being without news content? And we'll come to AI later, because AI is just going to be combining the content produced by news websites. But it's very difficult imagining a search platform not having news content. And the counter argument that we often receive is, oh, but we don't monetize so much of the news content that's there, where there are very few ads. But that completely misses the point. The idea is that when news content is present on a platform like Google Search, I know that it's a rich source of information. I know that it's a source of information that's current, that's diverse, that's changing over time, and that gives me a massive amount of trust in what Google is giving me, because it's coming from good sources, from credible sources that put in money to produce this content. And it also gives me a very valuable thing of habit. Habit and trust are extremely important in platform economies, because what they ensure is that once I become used to looking for stuff on Google, maybe the habit being formed because of the rich content that comes from news, it's very likely that I will be using Google for other things also, including commercial content, including content that is extremely monetizable directly. Right. And so that's the basic idea that we try to bring out in our paper. And we've been talking about this for months now to so many people. It's solid economic logic. I'd also like to say that there are many other benefits apart from just this trust and habit thing, which is huge. A base of users on Google that uses search in general also gives Google a lot of data about user behavior that even if it does not track individually, it can use with some amount of aggregation to further optimize their algorithms, right? So if all of this is there, why don't they pay? And I think everyone in this room and in the audience knows about this. There's a lot of market power, and market power not only in terms of them having them being huge companies, they have huge network effects, which means that advertisers, if I'm an advertiser and I'm thinking about posting my content, my advertising on Google versus a downstream platform like a news agency, I know that there's a lot more people viewing the Google search platform. There's just a lot of market power that just comes about because of the structure of the market. The second big idea in this is that surplus should be split fairly. There are many methods of saying once I get to a number of which is the value of news to say Google or Facebook, how do I split this number, right? And what we do is here we depend on more than 50 years of rich economic theory, starting with John Nash in the 1950s. You may have seen the movie A Beautiful Mind. It's basically following from that logic, which has stood the test of time. So just to drive home this point, if I search for Ukraine on the Google search bar, I don't write Ukraine news. I don't write Ukraine Washington Post, Ukraine Los Angeles Times. I just write Ukraine on the search bar. The first few results that I get are almost always, with the respect of Ukraine, you'll always get news results. But think about a lot of other things that you also search for. I heard this interesting discussion about just before the session about how you define news. News can be not only politics, it can also be entertainment, it can be about sports. This is all content that is extremely valuable and costly to make that Google would throw up without us asking ever for the term news, right? And this sort of goes to what Google often claims, and when we talk to publishers across the world, that Google claims that only 2% of news searches are related to news. they never tell us how they define this definition of news searches, because it seems from other studies and also just anecdotally, it seems absurd, if I may say so, that only 2% of my search behavior on Google is related to news content. A similar logic applies to Facebook, but it is a different logic. It's about the kind of engagement that I have with the platform because my friends are discussing news items, news stories. Arguably, there is more flexibility that Facebook has with respect to whether it wants to allow this content there or not. But you can also, using a different set of assumptions, calculate the amount that is owed. Just to put this in context, advertising revenue as a percentage of GDP you see this across many papers, falls precipitously in the United States when Google becomes the default search engine, and then when Facebook becomes a more general platform open to other colleges and universities initially, and then to the entire country. And the one argument that we often hear from people is that, maybe news isn't as popular anymore. And survey after survey shows that news is being consumed. It's just that the channels through which they're being consumed has changed. In particular, as you can see, this is from Pew Research. A lot of consumption just takes place from search and social media. A lot of it obviously takes place from news websites. So this idea or this argument that news consumption is falling is not borne out by data. And if anything, it's changed to digital platforms. And that's, again, where market power problems come into play. There are three components of our methodology. I won't get into the details right now, but essentially you start off with the relevant advertising revenue for the platform in the country that you're looking at. This can be obtained from company filings. We're happy to help out. As I showed you in the first slide, we've been calculating this for many, many countries. Then what you do once you have all the advertising revenue that's relevant, you want to calculate the share that is attributable to news content. For this, we use state-of-the-art studies. For Google, for example, we use a study that was done by Fair Research in Switzerland. But then we tinker with their assumptions also to show the robustness of our findings. On the Facebook side, we use a very famous paper that was published in the American Economic Review. Once you get the amount of money, so you had all the money that they're making from advertising, then you get the money that they're making from news content, and then you want to split this, right? And for splitting this, we rely on both economic theory and historical benchmarks, and we get to a number of $13 billion or $14 billion, as you were asking me. What I'd also like to point out is that we made an app so that you could do it yourself. The QR code, if you scan this QR code right now, it'll take you to the app on your mobile phone or on your device. If you're not happy or satisfied with the assumptions we take, for example, we assume that 13% of time that people spend on Facebook is on news. You might not be happy with that, make that 5%. Similarly, for a fraction of news demand on Google, you might not be satisfied with 35%, make that 20%. Change the share of revenue that you want to split between the publishers and platforms, you'll get to a number. Invariably, whatever you do, you will get to a number that is far in excess of anything that the platforms have agreed to, or in the US or in Latin America or the rest of the world. So I encourage you to use that. There are many questions that we could have, and I often think of these questions as being trying to muddy the argument, but they're really not. People talk about subscription revenue. It's easy to offset that. There's no comparison between the revenues that the platforms make versus subscription revenues. There are questions about platforms reducing news content related to it relates to substitution patterns. So we had this interesting point, I think, made by Ryan that because Canada was proximate to the US case, they had to push as much as possible. But it's also applicable in Latin America, for example, where there are many publishers that produce Spanish language content. And so they could try to arm twist some publishers because they can't substitute away to others. So we can, there are all these different insights that come into this. Obviously, a law would make all these problems much less problematic. I have not talked about the threat posed by AI, but there is a threat posed by AI. The interesting thing here is that the attribution task is extremely difficult now. Tech companies are in an arms race to get more data. The models that they use in generative AI, transformer models, do not easily allow attribution, right? So it's very difficult to say whether this story came from the following source or not. But there are some guiding principles even here, and we're working on valuing news, and I talk about that in a slide. One obvious insight is that they cannot produce good output without having good input, right? No large language model, no generative AI model on the planet can produce output about current affairs, whether that be about entertainment or sports or politics or whatever it is, without taking input from the content that's being produced by news publishers. So that the value that they're producing is definitely coming from the input value that they're taking. And that is not counting, and Danielle was referring to this, about the vast archival data that they have, which is of immense value. So one way you could value this, and we're working on this, is unlike search, unlike social media, which have value right now, a lot of value that the large language models are producing is in future streams of revenues. In the sense that right now they're not making a lot of money from their large language models, but they will be eventually. So you could think of this as a growth stock. A growth stock, for those familiar, I'm a finance professor, so I have to use this analogy. A growth stock is something that is not producing a lot of value right now, but it will in the future. So there are ways of attributing how much value the market thinks is coming from large language models in terms of stock movements, which capture future value in present terms. That we're working on. There are other approaches. There's a copyright approach. Obviously, they're using our content, so they should pay for it, metering services, etc. But however, what is really important in this is that lack of attribution is a huge problem, which means that without collective bargaining, or better yet, having laws or regulations, you cannot really get this value, even if we put a number to this. What may help in the interim, my co-author Anya is the domain expert in this, so she's written a nice piece and pointer about what you could do to make capture more value in your negotiations with AI. Some of it is that better images, video, historical archives, current content with journalists, high quality content. It's a nice resource that you may want to use to take a look. Will Meta and Google exit news? I would say, and Danielle also talked about this, Meta, it's possible because they've been trying very hard to not be a source of news. It's difficult to imagine that completely because that's just how conversations happen. But with respect to Google, I think it's very difficult for them to actually claim that they will completely exit news, because their whole business model, what they produce, is based on information, right? And in fact, right now, they are behind in the race with OpenAI. And if anything, they actually need a lot more data. So it's inconsistent that Google would exit news. What they can do, obviously, is they'll try to put one party against the other. Or right now in California, they're doing a partial withdrawal, which is more of a threat strategy than anything that's credible. But if I were Google, that's exactly what I try to do, because what I want is I'd want to divide the ranks, right? Won't talk about the ongoing lawsuits. That's already taken a lot of time. The only last thing that I want to talk about, this is my last slide, is that the importance of collective bargaining. In economics, what we like to call this is a coordination problem, in the sense that, if I, as a publisher, bargain one-to-one with Google, Google has a lot of bargaining power because they know they can talk to other publishers. As a single publisher, I am financially constrained. Any amount of money that I receive is valuable for me because that would help me in the very short term, even if it hollows me out in the long term. And so the analogy that I like to give is that right now, platforms are saying, I'll give you $1, right, to one major publisher. Why? Because that one major publisher will give them the data for their large language model, will give them the data for the search results. And the publisher is thinking $1 is better than nothing. We're getting some money that will help our newsrooms. But what we want to point out is that using any kind of methodology, our methodology is out there, but there are many others, completely transparent. When you bargain together, they should receive something like $20, right, or even more. And that $20 is enough not only to give that original publisher, which was getting $1, more than one, right? They will now get more than one, but also distribute a lot of money to other publishers as well as small publishers. It really depends on the design of the law. So the concluding thought is that it's important for publishers to bargain. That's difficult. That's why we need laws and regulation. So thanks. So feel free to contact Anya. She's the domain expert also.
Hola, Haaris. Hola, Daniel. Perdón por mi llegada tarde a la mesa. Justo estaba terminando de integrar un panel acá en Ginebra, en Suiza, para hablar justamente de la cuestión de la inteligencia artificial y la propiedad intelectual de los editores. Con lo cual muchos de estos conceptos que tanto tú como Daniel mencionaron respecto de la inteligencia artificial, hoy fueron tema aquí en Ginebra, donde, como bien tú sabes, en la Organización Mundial de la Propiedad Intelectual se debaten un poco las políticas globales en esta materia. Y respecto del uso que hacen los medios, los motores de inteligencia artificial del contenido que generamos los medios de comunicación y otros productores de contenidos, porque también en la mesa estaban los artistas, los escritores, los cineastas, los músicos. Hay tres como conceptos básicos que tienen que ser respetados respecto del uso que hacen los motores de inteligencia artificial generativa de los contenidos. Uno es el consentimiento, o sea que no se puede tomar, raspar o aspirar el contenido ni histórico ni permanente que generamos los medios sin nuestra autorización. El segundo es el crédito o la atribución, o sea que estos motores tienen que de alguna manera establecer en sus respuestas el origen o la fuente que dio origen a esas respuestas, y sobre todo cuando se trata de medios de comunicación, como una manera de fortalecer el valor de la marca periodística y que no quede diluido en una respuesta genérica. Y finalmente, la compensación. Obviamente, estos contenidos están protegidos por propiedad intelectual y como tal deben ser objeto de una licencia y compensados. De hecho, ya ha habido casos, y no sé si los comentaron hoy en la CIP, respecto de acuerdos cerrados por distintas empresas de medios, agencias de noticias, empresas de medios de distintos países de Europa, con motores de inteligencia artificial al respecto. Ustedes claramente están diciendo que defienden la negociación colectiva, pero al margen de que puede ser un camino conveniente, es una buena noticia que los motores estén haciendo acuerdos con los medios, ¿no les parece? Eso es una primera pregunta, tanto para Daniel como para Mateen. Y la otra que les quería preguntar es respecto de estos motores de inteligencia artificial. ¿Ustedes creen, generativa, ustedes creen que los valores que se están manejando respecto de los acuerdos de licencia con los medios, tanto por el archivo como por la información corriente, son auspiciosos? ¿Creen que esto puede ser una fuente de ingresos importante, sobre todo por el efecto sustitutivo? Porque a diferencia del estadio anterior, donde finalmente en muchos casos, si bien hablábamos de jardines amurallados, muchas veces la información se terminaba consumiendo en los medios. En el caso de los motores de inteligencia artificial, la información está más distante de los medios, se consume directamente muchas veces en el mismo motor. Quería hacerles esta primera pregunta respecto de la inteligencia artificial, que es un tema que hoy está muy en el centro de la escena.
I'm happy to jump in. You articulated well the way that we also see the use of our content. We call it the 3 C's: consent, credit, and compensation. The problem with a lot of the big tech platforms that are already taking our content, which is why you've never seen us litigate against search, even though we believe we would have a very strong case, is in the United States, the first thing that you need to prove is that you did not consent, that it was unauthorized. And with Google, with search, since they own 95% of the market, no one is going to opt out of search because we're so reliant on the traffic, even though we're only getting pennies on the dollar. It's what we call a Hobson's choice, which is why their decision to remove news was so strategically awkward, because they have put themselves out there as providing the world's information, and opting out on being a part of that is not an option for us. It's like the water supply cutting off the water. So consent has always proven to be difficult when trying to litigate a case with the large tech platforms. However, in AI with developers, it's not as much the case, because we did not consent to the use of our content in our terms of service. It prohibits the use of our content to train AI. And the reason why is because we get paid for those uses today. So using our content unlawfully and then building an entire AI system on top of illegally stolen goods is actually something that investors are very scared about, because, and you've seen articles saying, we've invested so much, you can't possibly, even if the law finds against us, you should still give us a free pass, essentially, which is obviously ridiculous, but that is what they're saying. Because retroactive use and the fact that we've already been gobbled up to train these models, they're saying licensing is impossible, and I would disagree. And that was proven by your first question. You asked whether the agreements on AI are favorable. And we believe that they are. First of all, they demonstrate the falsehood of what I just said about impossibility of licensing. There's also collectives that are set up to efficiently come into compliance. It also ignores that there's many markets: financial, medical, academic, entertainment, other, I mean, I could name brands of industries and companies that license our content today. So the fact that it's impossible or too hard to license is proven wrong by these agreements. So we actually view them favorably. And they also set benchmarks in our own collective licensing efforts that help price the models. And that goes to your second question: do we believe that they've, quote unquote, done well, that it's a fair market value that they're receiving, especially in the face of potentially being replaced by AI offerings if they directly compete in the same market with the same audience and serve the same purpose? And you raise a very important point, because to the extent that our content is being used to license and train in training is one aspect of the relationship where I do believe that there's pre-existing and also very much the ability to license and training today. However, when outputs are so egregious and have verbatim copies of our articles, I would say that's a per se violation. But even when there are summaries and excerpts of our articles that could be a replacement to clicking through so that we can monetize, that could also be a fundamental threat, especially if it's tied to search, again, where we can't opt out. Attribution has been proposed as the solution. I don't believe it's a solution. I believe it would be favorable. We support attribution. However, when there's direct competition by a very product, we've already seen 65% of users don't click through today, even with attribution. And if you're getting an AI summary of an article, the likelihood of clicking through is slim to none. Another thing we're concerned about with attribution is when our brand is used as credibility to legitimize an output, that could lead to brand tarnishment because of hallucinations in the AI ecosystem. So we have concerns around attribution. And as far as transparency, what's knowing is used in the model, that's something else we support, so that we can enforce our rights, like I mentioned before. And that goes to training, the use of our content, and the other two C's, which is credit and compensation.
So,
Clarísimo. Perdón. Sí, Mati.
no, go ahead. It's okay.
No, justamente quería preguntarles respecto de la diferente actitud que han tenido en Canadá Google y Meta. Y una pregunta que yo le he hecho a nuestro querido Paul Digan, y se las vuelvo a hacer a ustedes. Si es tan fácil para una compañía, en este caso Meta, decir que no va a cumplir la ley y para eso modificar su producto y eliminar las noticias, que en realidad, como ustedes bien saben, en realidad las elimina no solamente la difusión directa, sino el hecho de poder compartir entre usuarios noticias de medios canadienses, lo cual es grave desde el punto de vista de el derecho a la información de los propios canadienses y la libertad de los usuarios de poder compartir un link de un medio de comunicación eligiéndolo. ¿A ustedes les parece que esta actitud no tiene que tener o no va a meritar algún tipo de sanción? Porque si no es como que se le está abriendo la puerta a una compañía como Meta, en este caso, para incumplir la ley. Y si bien Meta puede modificar su producto diciendo que las noticias son menos relevantes, lo cierto es que las noticias siguen estando en la vida de la gente y la gente las sigue compartiendo. O sea, aunque Meta sostenga que no es tan importante como la vida privada, pero la gente sigue compartiendo noticias y se sigue relacionando a través de las noticias, y las redes sociales son un espacio de relacionamiento. Entonces, yo les pregunto, ¿qué hacer con un caso como el de Meta, donde claramente hay una decisión de incumplir una ley, como en el caso de Canadá?
So that's a good question, and it goes to something that was discussed earlier. I was asked how Lion members are reacting and opposing legislation that would get them paid. There's another reason. In that particular case, we know the situation, but there's another reason why some local, small, especially small publications may fear legislation if they see their traffic going down, or if they see users not being able to share links with each other. And I agree, it's critical. News is about our everyday lives. So to ignore that fact and how it merges with what Facebook, cat videos, and pictures for grandma to see, news is still relevant in the same respect, because it's not just hard news. We're also talking about soft news about who won the soccer game, football game, sorry. You know, a lot of our small and local publications, I will say, are fearful, because in many cases they see this traffic and some have even built a model, their entire business model around that traffic that they might get from social. Not as much maybe from search, but definitely social, because Facebook has a page and so forth. What I think that it's difficult for them to see is that financial independence and being compensated for your fair market value is actually a better exchange. When our members first were on Google 20 years ago, they made the best decision that they could at that time. And at that time, Larry Page said, we want to get users to where they want to be. And it was only a link, and everybody would click through, so everybody was getting a ton of traffic. It was before Google bought DoubleClick and monopolized the advertising ecosystem, which has now led to a reduced return, because you don't get as many clicks because they've changed their model. And when you do, you get maybe 30% of every advertising dollar. So at the time when people partnered with Google or Facebook, there was a value exchange. It was over time that the model changed, and now it's a losing proposition, and we can't get out because of the Hobson's choice. So to your second question, showing links among users, yes, that I do believe that's critical to not just users and their desire for critical information, not just on the search engine, which it's very clear, but I would argue also on social, but also the dependency that we still have. And I think that a financial separation and a detachment would actually be healthier and a better situation for our industry so that we can be an independent free press, but also not be so dependent upon, on our website, I'll put it in the chat, they changed the algorithm on us, and that could mean the end of some in our industry. And so being beholden to those types of changes, I don't believe is a winning scenario.
Está claro, está claro. Una pregunta más. Ustedes saben, y esto para Mateen, el estudio, como otro estudio que había hecho previamente en 2018, la News Media Alliance, sobre el valor de las noticias, o como un estudio que se hizo en Suiza, en general es criticado por las plataformas porque hablan de que le falta sustento técnico, tecnológico, obviamente el famoso statement de que solo el 3% de las búsquedas de Google están vinculadas con noticias, la cuestión de que los valores, incluso hay un artículo que se publicó a fin del año pasado de Liza McPherson, crítico de este tipo de trabajos porque dice que tiene escaso sustento técnico. Ustedes frente a eso, rápidamente, ¿qué responden? Obviamente he leído vuestros argumentos, pero me parece bueno porque muchas veces a los editores les llega, obviamente, en los comentarios críticos y es bueno tener también la mirada de quienes hicieron este tipo de trabajos, tanto el de la News Media Alliance del 2018 como este de la Universidad de Columbia.
So we've been asked this question for months now, and we happy to talk about it again. So there have been different studies that have been done over time, different methodologies. But the interesting thing I think is that we all sort of come to similar numbers. Now, I'm an academic. It's the most fun thing I do in my personal life is poking holes at other people's studies. And therefore, I'm very paranoid about my own study also. So the first point that the platforms make is saying that, you know what, your methodology is flawed because the numbers that you're using are flawed. The first of all, we are very happy to use numbers that Google or Facebook would provide on their own, right? In fact, in our paper, we actually talked about what the ideal experiment would be. And, you don't have to give us the data. We could have a third party that would, keep the data for safekeeping and use that, which would essentially be, what do I want to know? I just want to know how much time or how much of impressions or how much of engagement is of users is driven by news content, right? The platforms would actually have the data and we'd be happy to use that. In the absence of such data, there are very high quality studies that have been done to understand how valuable is news for users. The analogy I like to give, since we were talking about soccer just now, is that I subscribe to Paramount Plus in the US. And I do that because I love watching soccer. I love watching Champions League, right? And there were two incredible matches yesterday, right? And I subscribed, and there are other services that are provided by Paramount Plus, movies, shows, etc., etc. But the value that I have for that service is driven, in my case, by the existence of Champions League football, right? If that content is not there, I'm no longer interested in subscribing or being part of the service. And there are studies out there that try to get to that aspect of the market. They're trying to understand, for how many users who use Google is news a must-have, right? And they come to a certain number. Now, the important thing about that number is that whether you accept it or not, you can play with that number. The way we've developed our methodology and the way the app is situated is that you can easily change that parameter, that 35% to 20%, to 10%, whatever it is, and you can come to numbers themselves. Invariably, I said this before, you'll still get numbers that are much higher. The other thing is that whenever Google says that only 2% or 3% of search behavior is related to news content, we've been asking them time and again, over and over again, how do you define these queries? How do you define these searches? What is the definition of a new search for you? And we've not received a response yet. The reason why I asked that is because I gave you an example of Ukraine, where I just type in Ukraine and I consume a lot of news content on the website itself. I think all of us in this room are guilty of using Google for search and just consuming news content there itself. Very few of us actually go down to click-throughs, right? So until they clarify exactly what they mean by the 2%, it seems, I would actually say it's absurd that only 2% of search behavior on Google is related to news. Even from a supply side, in terms of raw numbers, the Australian Competition Commission, when it was figuring out their bargaining code, they came to a number of 14% of just traffic, right? Of just the number of searches that were made in a typical day. So the 2% is by no means acceptable or even, makes sense from any perspective. Yes, and that's what we keep saying. We keep saying that please give us the data. We'll redo the study. We'll do the study based on your data. But until we get that, we have excellent studies. These are studies that are published for Facebook. The study that has been published in the American Economic Review, which is possibly the best economics journal on the planet, right? And they give us the raw data. They give us user behavior, the time they spend on the platform for different things. And we use that raw data to get to that 13% number that we use. Again, you're free to use the data. It's up on the website and play with it. I think what all of this misses is the idea that irrespective of whether you accept the exact numbers or not, you change those numbers, you'll still get figures that are well in excess of what they're paying. And I think I say this too many times, but I just feel that it requires saying constantly.
Gracias, Haaris. Los voy a dejar con... Ah, no, perdón, Danielle, ¿querías agregar algo?
I'm not an economist. I thought that was very well said. So no, I didn't.
Yo como no puedo verlos muy bien a todos porque estoy con un teléfono, le voy a dejar a Carlos el cierre por si hay preguntas de terceros. Sé que ya estamos llegando al final del tiempo. Y desde Europa, esta vez no desde Argentina, ha sido un gusto saludarlos nuevamente. A Danielle, ya la conozco de varias reuniones y a Mateen es la primera vez, así que gracias por su participación y los dejo con Carlos.
Muchas gracias, Martín. Mucha suerte en Ginebra. Muchas gracias a todos. Teniendo en cuenta que los próximos panelistas están ambos en Europa y es tarde, vamos a dar paso al último panel entonces. Gracias, Carlos Jornet, también. Y muchísimas gracias, Danielle y Haaris. Ha sido un placer tenerlos. It was very, very nice. A pleasure to have you. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you very much, Carlos. It was great to see you. Thank you for having me. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Haaris. Take care.